My name is David Brown. This will be the second of a series of videos I have planned talking about zombie movies. The first video was talking about the best, what I would call mid-tier zombie movies, the ones that are kind of obscure and that a lot of people, or at least the ones who don't uh, watch a lot of zombie movies, wouldn't have heard of. And this time I'll be talking about what I consider the worst zombie movies. So, with this video, I've tried a lot more than the last one to prepare. I'm going to see if I can do better. I might redo some of this in another take. Uh, Now, the main thing I have to say about zombie movies and the bad ones is that my list of the worst ones would be very short, and a big part of that is the nature of the genre. Start with, you have a whole lot of movies that are technically bad just because they were very low budget and by people who didn't know a lot about filmmaking. Another thing is that there are a lot of those technically bad movies that are still very creative. So those usually will at least get a pass from me, even get a good review from me, and that includes some of the ones on my best mid-tier list, like Chopper Chicks and Zombie Town. I'll show that one. And the third thing is that there's a lot of the bad movies that are just uncreative, and those also tend to drop off my list. They're bad, but they aren't interesting, especially in terms of how they show the zombies. They are copying Night of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead, more recently, 28 Days Later, and they're doing it badly without doing anything new. And with those, you could easily fill a list with them, but to me, that would just be boring. So to me, the worst zombie movies are usually the ones that I find stupid, offensive, or especially, as I put it, offensively stupid. And these are the ones I'll be covering, and certainly they're the biggest fart by far. And one more thing I'll say, uh, the biggest criteria of a really bad zombie movie for me is I do not own it. And a lot of the time, I have not even reviewed it because it's that bad. Now, I'll be starting into this with the oldest one, and this is one of the only ones I do own, although that's just because it was on a bulk pack. It's called Zombies on Broadway. Here it is in a collection of movies that I had actually bought because it has another one called The Walking Dead. That one isn't good, but it was made in the 30s, later 30s, but still very, very early. And it was one of maybe the first modern zombie movie, so you really can't even judge it on the same curve as anything else. But then Zombies on Broadway, this was a movie that was about 1945. I won't swear to that, but it was around there. And it was at the tail end of a wave of zombie movies that were mostly based on voodoo, or what people believed about voodoo at that time. What they really did, and here I'll say right at this point, a lot of this will be talking about good zombie movies and why these are so much worse by comparison. So, Zombies on Broadway was really a remake of a movie called I Walked with a Zombie, which was maybe the first zombie movie that was really good. I've criticized it for good reasons, but it was well done and it did something different with voodoo zombies. Here, they try to remake it as a comedy, so you could call it a parody. It's really hard even to evaluate it in those terms just because it's from so long ago. We don't have a frame of reference for whether it was actually funny then, but it is definitely not funny now. The whole setup is that you have a voodoo island clearly based on Haiti, and you have two complete idiots who were supposed to be a comedy team running around doing virtually nothing. Uh, they tried to set up some scares. Some of those are kind of amusing, or at least you can appreciate it. Like the only zombie. Here's a picture. It's the same guy who was in I Walked with the Zombie, sneaks up behind the guys and takes both of them out, then grabs a girl before walking away. So that's their one really good sequence. Uh, Everything else is just dull. In the biggest ways, they had Bela Lugosi as the zombie master trying to create his own zombies. And I suppose he has a few good moments, but mostly you could just see he was doing it for the paycheck. There is zero effort from him. He still gets a few good moments, but the big one is just he tells the zombie kill, and of course the zombie kills him. So this if you watch it, it won't be offensive, but that's mostly because it did not have the ambition to be offensive. Now, I'll be skipping forward on this list. I had a few from the 50s and 60s, actually mostly the 60s. I'll throw out one called The Frozen Dead, which was actually a Nazi zombie movie, but that's all I'll say about that right now. So going into the 70s, the big one on my radar from that is called The Child. With that, it's a movie that was filmed in the early to mid 70s, not released until a few years later. This is really an example of a movie that's mostly harmlessly bad. You can obviously see it was a very low budget production and it was an mostly amateur production. So the acting's wonky. The effects really aren't even a big thing either way. So that actually kind of gives it a pass. When there are zombies on screen, you really can't see them that well. They almost look like the antagonists from the 60s movie Carnival of Souls. So they're at least getting some quality reference material in. Uh, so the plot here is that the child is a girl with psychic powers who can either bring the dead back to life or make friends with the undead. Uh, and the girl herself is the most obnoxious character in a movie with a lot of characters who are either boring or obnoxious. Uh, it and that alone can make it a hard watch to get through. They do still have some good moments with the zombies themselves. The big thing is you can actually see they're intelligent. At one point, one of them even operates a shotgun, so it's looking forward to Bubs the zombie. And they show some different behavior. At one point, someone blows a car horn and the zombies run away. You can say that's not scary, but it's an interesting idea that the undead would have different sensory sensitivities, and I have a lot of that myself, so I could almost empathize with that. But mostly it's just not that interesting. Most of it's standard 70s horror. If you were looking at The Omen, even Rosemary's Baby from the 60s, there probably wouldn't be a lot new. So I'll just move on. Now, there's one I'll be talking about next that's called Hell of the Living Dead. This was technically released in 1980s, but it is definitely still a 70s zombie movie. It was an Italian movie, or it gets remembered as an Italian movie. There were actually people from several countries involved. It's about a zombie outbreak that's supposed to be on an island. If anything, it's implied to be in one of the Pacific Islands, but they aren't very specific, or at least I don't remember them being specific. I'm definitely not going to go through this one to double check. And the most conspicuous thing about it is that it's what I call the fake movie. And what that means, what I mean by that, is that they took other people's footage. It was from an anthropology documentary that was made in the 70s, still so already suspect, and they worked it in to a zombie movie. And that does have one impressive thing, which is that it's actually well integrated enough that there are parts that you can see they did for the zombie movie that still look like the anthropology footage, uh, but that's a very small phrase. Then a lot of it was using the anthropology element as an excuse for a white woman character to take her clothes off and bond with the natives. The one thing that's interesting is that they did a lot of riffs, either copying or maybe making fun of Dawn of the Dead. And you can see that especially with the music. They credited Goblin, which also worked on Dawn of the Dead, but you can tell a lot of it was just music that they either bought or stole from Goblin and reused it over and over. And this is far from the harmlessly bad zombie movie. There are interesting moments. The two completely surreal things. At the opening, there's a radioactive zombie rat, and around the middle, you have a couple zombie kids. Those are interesting. Uh, the rest of it, it's just feels like the 1930s zombie movies warmed over with all the cultural and racial baggage thrown in without reflecting on it. And at the end, there's some gore that's impressive. At least it was very extreme. Usually it's badly done as an effect, but you can see they were trying, and they did do some interesting things. But it's all pretty predictable. It ends with everyone getting eaten, and then you see the zombies spreading to other areas. So by then, that was all pretty routine, at least. Still, if you watch it, it will be kind of cringy, but not actively offensive. Mostly, it's just kind of amusingly bad, and it's amusing but also impressive how brazenly they took other material to put into this movie. Now, the next on the list, and I'll really need to be trying to speed this up, is going to be a movie called Alien Dead. This is another one that I own, but I only own it as a digital video, so I'm not going to show it. Here, this was made by a guy named Fred Olin Ray. If you know anything about 1980s sci-fi horror, this guy is as notorious as Ed Wood, though he definitely wasn't the worst. He was on the level of just about the level with the worst guys. The other one you might hear about is Don Dohler. Uh, Fred Olin Ray was better. Sometimes he was even good. He did an alien knockoff called Good Deep Space that I gave a good review, a little tongue in cheek, but it's actually well done for what it is. And the big thing is that almost all his work was direct to video, and this was one of the very first ones. So the thing about The Alien Dead, uh, it's very cheap. Almost all the acting is amateurish, but they at least avoid the things that were cliches. The big thing, you have what are supposed to be zombies living in a swamp, but they don't actually seem to multiply. They're supposed to have been zombified by exposure to a comet or some kind of extraterrestrial object. So they'll kill people, actually try to sneak up on them, which usually looks pitiful, but they were trying to show zombies with stealth and even some intelligence. And they don't turn anyone else into a zombie. You see one other person exposed to the meteorite, where it's implied she's transforming. But apart from that, you seem to have just the one group of zombies, not the zombie apocalypse. So that, I think, is the main reason it's as interesting as it is. It's still obviously not good. It's the kind of thing, though, if you watch it, it's fun, or it could be fun, depending on your taste. And the other big thing, uh, it's just an extra touch if you watch all the way through. In the credits, they play a song that's supposed to be kind of introspective, but at a certain point, when the credits are rolling, they just stop at the very end of the credits, and the song keeps going quite a bit longer. I think at least 20 or 30 seconds, even a minute. So that's the kind of movie you're dealing with here. It's, again, bad, but it's the harmless kind of bad. And now I'm at a point where I might have to streamline this. I have two and more in mind, at least from the early to mid 80s. And the one that's most notorious is called The Burial Ground. Now, this is where you're getting into the offensive territory. And the main thing I'll talk about is that they wanted to do a scene where a woman is attacked and mutilated by her child that's turned into a zombie, but to do it the way they wanted to do it, there were actual laws that required them to cast an adult as the child. And they did that with a midget, and that just makes it creepy. They do a lot more that gets really cringy about the mother child relationship. It's all to set up that one scene, and it's just not just creepy, but completely contrived. And the unfortunate thing is that the zombies themselves are pretty interesting. They look very decayed. A lot of the time, if they get struck, they just kind of crumble like a mummy. They are appearing at an archaeological site where someone reads an incantation that brings them back to life. Then you do see a few people get zombified, but it's not a big thing. What's impressive about the zombies is they're really, really random. You could see one coming. By the time he gets destroyed, there could be two more coming from completely different directions. And it's really a little hard to tell if that's intelligent behavior or just random chance. Either way, it makes sense, and it's actually kind of scary, at least you might say disconcerting. But for me, between how cheap the effects are, and they are very cheap, and how poor the acting is, and uh, how much creepy there is with the midget cast as a kid, I got through it once. I watched it again when I was mentioning it in an ebook I did on zombie movies. Uh, but that time I got up to within about 20 minutes at the end, and then I just quit. And the real reason, by then I'd seen enough of it. I did not need to see any more to say what I wanted to about it. Now, another 80s zombie movie is Bloodsuckers from Outer Space. This I'm going to skip over because this is a satire that's actually pretty clever. And the big thing is there's zombies reanimated or transformed by a force from outer space, and they keep insisting that they're actually intelligent and that they want a peaceful existence. At one point, they say that the force animating them has discovered how to be and how to come to an end. But then in their regular behavior, they're still really kind of halfway between zombies and vampires. So there's some very crude gore. A lot of that's done like it's slapstick or what they call splat stick. Still, there's things that are interesting about it, and for that reason, I'm passing over it. Now, the worst 80s zombie movie, as far as what's bad, it never actually came out in theaters. No one seems to be quite sure when it even came out at all. It's called The Chilling, and this is right at the bottom for amateurish. They got a couple actors. One was Linda Blair. The other, I believe his name is Haggerty. He was playing Grizzly Adams, but they aren't even the central characters. Uh, it The main story is that there is a father who had put his wife in cryogenic suspended animation. Then his son dies in a bank robbery, so he also gets frozen. Then there's an accident at the cryogenic facility where the frozen people all come back to life as zombies. This is actually another one where the zombies themselves are okay. They look interesting. They're very cheaply done, but they're kind of effective. And what's most interesting is that it isn't even a big deal about them being cannibalistic. I really don't even recall if they specifically show that they're cannibalistic, but they are almost always openly hostile to people. The completely surreal part, they do at the end catch the guy in charge of the cryogenic facility who has been actually using it for selling organs, and they put him in one of the freezers. So it's not well done. I think Linda Blair, especially, you can really see how she got no real career after Exorcist. Probably she wasn't that good, but mostly she got typecast into horror roles that were even worse. Uh, the guy from Grizzly Adams has some good moments, but then he's really more like the supporting character. You could at least get a few laughs out of this, but that's about it. And now I'm actually getting on track. I'll double back for one more, though. This is Hard Rock Zombies. This is a zombie comedy that just doesn't work. I would have, I'm sure, covered it in my video on worst movies, so I'm not going to talk about it more now. This is another one that's almost a fake movie, except here it was done as a made up movie in another movie. Then they made it into a full length feature. And there's a few things that work, but most of it's just random. And it really shows how doing weird for its own sake does not make that good a zombie movie. Now, I'm going to skip forward then to the one that I have the biggest rant about, and this is skipping way forward. It's a movie called Deadgirl from around 2008. Uh, Again, I might be wrong about that, but it's in that ballpark. And this is the definitive example of what I mean when I talk about offensively stupid. The whole plot and setup is that you have two guys who look through an abandoned hospital and they find this zombified woman, and it is very obviously not human, or is it not a regular living human, tied up, and one of them decides to, let's just say, abuse the zombie. And the whole thing, I think it would be easy for people to think I'm just doing this because I find it morally offensive. Yes, this is absolutely morally offensive, but my big complaint gets to really two things. One, this was not material that would have supported a feature-length movie. If they had made it a short, it still would have been offensive. It probably would have been bad, but it could at least have made a reasonable point, especially if they'd just shown the one guy who is most obviously a creep doing this. Instead, really just to get the running time out feature length, they show other people joining in. And if you look at the actual creature, that is just contrived stupidity. And the other big thing, to me, I find this to be a gross out movie that's pseudo intellectual. Now, that's a subjective judgment, but I would say it's absolutely a justifiable one. And how audiences react to a movie is a huge part of whether it works. Again, this is something where if they'd shown one guy in a short, even an 80-minute movie, doing what happens, it would have been one thing. This is just drawn out, and they try to make it look like they're making a serious point about gender roles and abuse when they aren't, or any point they do have, they go completely away from it. It would have been disturbing to show one guy completely insane who will settle for the zombie, but then they show people who are actually successful with their own girlfriends and partners still being tempted by a thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, that looks literally rancid. So this to me is just stupid and offensive. And one more thing is that they actually made it like it was a mainstream teen movie, which to me just makes it even more irritating. I actually did a review with no intention of watching again. I still tried to watch the opening. I literally could not get past the credits without quitting because of how much it annoyed me. And this is where I'll mention one more movie. It's called Contracted from 2013. That one I looked up. Now, what you can see with that one, it really could easily get a place on this list, except you can kind of argue whether it's a zombie movie. Mostly it's body horror, definitely gross out, but it's intelligent enough to make real points and have a real message. Deadgirl has none of that, or they pretend to have that, and any point they do make is just buried. So that's my list of the worst zombie movies. I did cover about 10 for this, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. So I'm going to wrap this up. The next one to cleanse this out is definitely going to be good zombie movies. So for Halloween, if you've gotten this far, watch a good zombie movie. They are out there.